The studio lights were too bright, the kind of brightness that made everything feel staged, even when it wasn't. Jasmine Crockett sat in the left chair, her posture straight but relaxed, palms resting on her lap. She'd done interviews before. She'd sparred with opponents on the House floor, survived town halls that felt more like tribunals. But this was different. This was national television. And across from her, Rachel Maddow was smiling that polished, practiced smile, the one that always meant she was about to set a trap and was sure you wouldn't see it coming. "We're joined tonight by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," Rachel began, her voice smooth as glass. "You've made headlines recently, some might say for all the wrong reasons." Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't move. She just waited. Rachel continued, the edges of her grin sharpening. "Your district is struggling with record evictions, underfunded schools, rising crime, yet you've spent a lot of time lately criticizing the media. Do you really think blaming journalists is the best use of your platform?" There it was, the opening jab. The audience, invisible beyond the cameras, held its breath. Jasmine tilted her head just slightly. "Is that a question," she asked calmly, "or an editorial?" Rachel's smile flickered, but she recovered. "It's a fair point. The facts are the facts. Your constituents are suffering. And while you're here tonight defending your record, they're still waiting for results." Jasmine drew in a slow breath. She had promised herself she wouldn't get baited into playing defense. "Not tonight. The facts," she said evenly, "are that my district has been systematically underfunded for decades, by federal and state policy you conveniently never cover on this show. But I'm curious," she leaned in just a fraction, enough that Rachel couldn't look away. "Did you bring me here to talk about solutions? Or did you just want a viral clip of you scolding another black woman on prime time?" For the first time all evening, Rachel didn't answer right away. Somewhere in the control room, a producer hissed into a headset. A stagehand adjusted a teleprompter, but the script wasn't going to help now. Jasmine let the silence stretch, her gaze steady, her voice a quiet dare. "Because if this is just theater," she said, "I didn't bring a costume." The smirk on Rachel Maddow's face didn't vanish completely, but it cracked, and everyone watching felt it. Rachel's nostrils flared, just enough that anyone who knew her could tell she hadn't expected the first shot to land so cleanly. But she smoothed her papers, eyes lowered, and when she looked up again, the smile was back in place, colder this time. "Well," she said, her tone dipping into that signature blend of patronizing and performative, "if you don't want to discuss your record, perhaps we can talk about your recent remarks accusing this network of selective reporting. Would you care to explain what you meant by that?" Jasmine didn't move an inch. She felt her heart pick up its tempo, but she'd learned long ago that nerves were just energy waiting for a purpose. She found her center and locked her gaze onto Rachel's. "I meant exactly what I said," she replied, her voice clear enough to cut through the studio hum. "This network, and most others, have an appetite for spectacle, not substance. You spend weeks replaying clips of angry town halls and then give a 90-second segment to the policies that created the crisis." A few feet away, the senior producer's pen stilled over the script. The floor manager made a sharp gesture to wrap this line of questioning, but Rachel ignored it. She was too determined to reclaim control. "You're suggesting," she pressed, "that journalists, myself included, are responsible for public distrust in government?" Jasmine tilted her chin. "I'm suggesting you're complicit in it. Because you have a platform big enough to show people the roots of the problem, but you'd rather dissect symptoms." Rachel's eyes narrowed. The smile was gone now, replaced by something taut and uneasy. "I think that's a convenient deflection," she snapped. "No," Jasmine said, still calm. "A deflection is when you invite someone here to pretend you're interested in dialogue but really you just want to embarrass them. You came here tonight expecting me to flinch. You wanted me defensive. That's not going to happen." The tension thickened. A camera operator risked a quick glance toward the control booth, silently asking if they should cut to commercial. But the director's voice came back flat in the headset, "Stay on them. Don't break." Jasmine shifted just slightly in her seat. My constituents aren't props. Their pain isn't content for your next segment. So if you're ready to have a real conversation about why these communities are suffering, and who benefits from their suffering, I'm all ears. Rachel's throat moved as she swallowed. And in that moment, millions of viewers saw the crack widen. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. The studio was too quiet, unnaturally so. In that stillness, something shifted. Even viewers who'd tuned in expecting Rachel to dismantle her guest could feel it. This wasn't the story they were promised. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't so much as allow a hint of triumph to show on her face. That was the part that unnerved people most, the calm, the measured certainty that she belonged in this chair just as much as any polished anchor. Rachel's fingers tapped once on her desk, searching for an opening. Let's be clear, she began, her voice pitched low, trying to regain her footing. No one here is trivializing the struggles of your district. But leadership means accountability. You've been in office over a year, why haven't things improved? A fair question, if it hadn't been asked with that practiced disdain. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. Things haven't improved because we're still fighting the same entrenched systems that prefer to see communities like mine in crisis. Because corporations fund campaigns to keep wages low and housing unstable. Because Congress is gridlocked, and media coverage, yours included, rarely calls out the root causes. You'd rather blame individuals than expose institutions. Rachel's lips parted, but she didn't speak. You know why that is? Jasmine continued, her voice soft but unwavering. Because institutions have lawyers. PR teams. Lobbyists. And a story about one congresswoman failing is easier than telling the truth about who profits from poverty. Somewhere, in 1,000 living rooms, people leaned closer to their screens. Rachel took a slow breath, her smile reassembling itself piece by piece. With all due respect, Congresswoman. Jasmine lifted a hand gently, not to interrupt, but to steady the conversation. Respect isn't using your platform to paint me as incompetent while ignoring the policies I'm fighting to change. Respect would be acknowledging that the crisis you're describing didn't begin with me, and it won't end with a single interview. A low murmur rippled through the production team. Someone in the control room whispered, "My God, she's flipping this whole segment." Jasmine turned slightly in her chair, addressing not just Rachel but every unseen viewer. If you think pointing fingers makes you part of the solution, you're wrong. The real work happens after the cameras turn off, when you decide whether you'll keep treating suffering as a headline or finally do something about it. Rachel blinked, her polished composure faltering just enough for the audience to see the truth. The truth was, she'd come for a soundbite. And Jasmine Crockett had given her something else entirely. The producer's voice crackled into Rachel's earpiece, a brittle whisper, "Go to break if you have to." But she didn't. She couldn't. Cutting away now would look like retreat, and Rachel Maddow had built her career on the illusion that she never lost control. Her eyes narrowed just slightly as she shifted her notes into a neater pile. "If you want to talk about institutional failures," she said, tone clipped, "let's talk about Congress's inability to pass meaningful reform. Let's talk about gridlock and partisanship, about all the speeches and no action." A perfect pivot, one that usually flustered less prepared guests. Jasmine didn't flinch. "By all means," she replied evenly. "Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the housing bill that would have helped 400,000 families but died because lobbyists for real estate giants outspent advocates 20-1. Let's talk about the workforce protections you didn't cover when the Senate gutted them behind closed doors." Rachel opened her mouth, but Jasmine was already leaning in, voice steady and low. So the microphones had to strain to pick up every word. "You want to talk about gridlock? Here's the part you leave out, Rachel, it's designed. It's profitable. The dysfunction you pretend to lament is exactly what your sponsors depend on to keep extracting wealth from the same people you say you care about." Rachel's jaw tightened. It wasn't a yell. It wasn't a rant. It was worse. It was the truth. You sit in this studio, Jasmine continued, with your graphics and your clever monologues, and you talk about injustice like it's an abstraction. But for people in my district, it's not a segment. It's not a rating spike. It's the reason their kids go to bed hungry. The air felt too heavy to breathe. The control room knew the segment was over, but no one had the nerve to cut the feed. Rachel cleared her throat, forcing her voice to stay even. So you're accusing me of, what, exactly? Jasmine didn't blink. I'm accusing you, she said softly, of making a career out of diagnosing problems you've never had to survive, and of confusing analysis with impact. The silence was so complete, it rang. And in that perfect quiet, millions of viewers realized the interview wasn't going to end the way Rachel expected. For a heartbeat, Rachel didn't move. Her hands rested atop her notes, perfectly still. Only her eyes betrayed the fracture. That smooth, infallible persona she'd cultivated across years of primetime journalism was cracking, and she knew it. She swallowed once before she spoke. Congresswoman, if you'd prefer to leave. Jasmine shook her head, calm as ever. I'm not going anywhere. You invited me here to have a conversation. Let's have it. Rachel exhaled through her nose, trying to reclaim her rhythm. Then let's be honest, she said. You're a first-term congresswoman from a district with one of the highest poverty rates in Texas. You talk about systemic injustice, but you knew what you were walking into. You chose this fight. Doesn't that come with responsibility? Jasmine's face softened, just barely. A flicker of something that wasn't anger, or even indignation. It was recognition. You're right, she said. I did choose this fight. But let's not pretend I started it. My mother raised me on food stamps. My father worked 3 jobs so we wouldn't lose our home. I didn't need a textbook to teach me what poverty looks like, I lived it. So when you suggest that the problem is my lack of experience, or my failure to fix a system that predates me by generations, you're not critiquing me. You're excusing the very power structures that benefit when nothing changes. Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came out. And Jasmine pressed on, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. You want to know why I came tonight? She asked. Because I'm tired of watching people like you pretend to care about working families while building empires off their despair. Because every time you frame poverty as a failure of individual grit, you erase the truth that it's engineered, and that it pays. The studio's lighting seemed to sharpen around them, as if the cameras themselves were straining to capture every word. And when you smile that smile, Jasmine continued, and you call this accountability, she gestured between them, you're not holding me responsible. You're protecting yourself from admitting that this system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. Rachel's breath caught, an almost imperceptible hitch that no producer could edit out. It wasn't just a rebuttal anymore. It was a quiet indictment. And millions of people watching at home knew it. Rachel's eyes flicked to the camera, an uncharacteristic move. For just a second, she looked like she was trying to remember the story she was supposed to be telling. The one where she was in control, steering the narrative, conducting the polite dissection of her guest's credibility. But Jasmine wasn't playing the part. The earpiece crackled again, we can break. Just give the signal. Rachel drew in a slow, measured breath, regaining her anchor voice. Congresswoman, I'm not here to diminish your experiences. But at some point, don't you have to move past grievance and focus on solutions? Blaming media, blaming corporations, blaming the system, how does that help your constituents today? Jasmine didn't look away. By telling the truth, she said, her voice clear enough that no one in the control booth dared lower her mic. Because when you don't name the forces responsible, you leave people thinking their hardship is their fault. That if they were just smarter, or worked harder, or stayed quieter, maybe they wouldn't be exhausted and broke. A hush settled over the set. Jasmine shifted, her hands unfolding slowly on the table between them. "Let me give you an example," she continued, her tone almost conversational. "Last week, a woman in my district, single mother, 2 kids, called my office. She was behind on rent because her employer cut her hours with no notice. She was one of thousands living paycheck to paycheck in a city where the cost of living outpaces wages by 40%. She let the detail hang there, unpolished, real. You know what she said to me? She said, 'I guess I'm just not working hard enough.' That's what happens when you spend decades telling people that poverty is a personal failing. That's what happens when the cameras only show the aftermath, never the cause." Rachel pressed her lips together, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. "And here's the thing," Jasmine continued, leaning in slightly. "You're not the only one who does it. This entire industry thrives on narratives that keep people numb and ashamed. Because if they ever realized how rigged it is, if they ever got angry enough to demand something different, this whole facade would collapse." The red live indicator glowed above the lens, blinking steady as a heartbeat. And Rachel, who had built her brand on exposing hypocrisy, found herself on the receiving end of the same scrutiny. It was the kind of moment no amount of clever editing could undo. Rachel's hand moved to her pen, fingers curling around it like she needed something solid to hold on to. She didn't interrupt. She didn't even look up right away. Jasmine let the silence settle, refusing to rescue her from it. "Look," Rachel began finally, her voice a fraction softer. "I understand why you feel this way. But this is a platform. Millions of people are watching. Don't you think you have a responsibility to inspire them instead of dividing them?" Jasmine's brows lifted, almost imperceptibly. "Inspire them," she repeated, the question so gentle it was almost tender. "You think that's what this is about, performance?" Rachel didn't answer. Jasmine drew a slow breath. "I'm not here to inspire anyone. I'm here to tell the truth. Because when you grow up watching your parents work themselves into the ground and still come up short, when you see your neighbors evicted, your schools starved of resources, your hospitals closing, eventually you stop caring about how your anger makes other people feel." She straightened, her gaze unblinking. "And you know what's more divisive than honesty? Silence." Rachel looked away, just for a second. The camera caught it anyway. "You want a feel-good story? Go find someone who's willing to pretend everything's fine." "I won't do that. Because there is nothing inspirational about watching the same cycle repeat itself year after year while people with power," she nodded toward the camera, "call it progress." The director mouthed to a floor manager, "How much time left?" 2 minutes. Just enough time for one more exchange. Rachel exhaled and finally met her gaze again. "If you could say one thing to the people watching right now," she asked, her voice more measured, "what would it be?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I'd say this," she answered, her voice low and sure. "You are not failing. You are surviving a system that was never designed for you to thrive in. Your exhaustion isn't a weakness, it's evidence of your strength. And no matter how many times someone tries to tell you it's your fault you're struggling, it isn't." The words fell into the hush like a verdict. Rachel's pen slipped from her hand, clattering softly on the table. And somewhere far beyond the studio walls, millions of viewers felt something tighten in their chests. Because they knew she wasn't just talking about her district. She was talking about all of them. Rachel didn't reach for her pen. She didn't try to reclaim the narrative. For the first time all night, she looked smaller, not diminished, but disarmed. Jasmine sat quietly across from her, hands folded in her lap. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was simply present, as if daring the moment to end on any note other than the truth. "You know," Rachel began, her voice carefully neutral, "I've covered politics for a long time. I've interviewed senators, presidents, cabinet secretaries. I thought I understood the stakes." She paused, exhaling. But I don't think I've ever had a guest look me in the eye and say this so plainly. Jasmine's expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked even more resolute. That's the problem, she said quietly. We've gotten so used to spin and performance that actual honesty sounds like an attack. Rachel glanced at the production crew, people she'd worked with for years. She knew every hand signal, every nervous glance, every calculated countdown to commercial. But there was no salvaging the script tonight. And part of her, though she'd never admit it out loud, knew maybe that was the point. The camera's red light blinked. A producer whispered 60 seconds into her earpiece. Rachel straightened. "Congresswoman," she said, her voice steadier now, "if you could wave a wand and change one thing tomorrow, what would it be?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I'd make people understand they're not each other's enemy," she said. "That the folks watching this, whether they live in a city like mine or a suburb or a small town, they're all living in a rigged economy. And as long as they're fighting over scraps, the people at the top keep winning." Rachel swallowed. "And until we tell that truth," Jasmine continued, "we'll keep having the same conversations, year after year, pretending we're confused why nothing changes." The studio felt like it was holding its breath. And for once, Rachel didn't try to fill the silence. It was Jasmine's moment. And she let it stand. The director counted down silently, fingers ticking off the seconds. In the control room, no one moved to roll the end credits or cue the music. They all knew instinctively that cutting away would be the real spectacle, proof that the network couldn't handle the very accountability it claimed to value. Rachel's throat tightened, but she forced her voice level. I think a lot of people at home are hearing you tonight in a way they haven't before." Jasmine nodded once, her expression still unshakable. "That's why I came," she said. "Not because I needed another headline. Because people deserve to hear the truth unfiltered." Rachel's fingers curled around the edge of her desk. "And what do you want them to do with that truth?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I want them to understand they are more powerful than they've been taught to believe," she said, her voice low but resonant. "That the same people telling them to distrust each other are the ones profiting from their division." She paused, just long enough to let the words land. "That every time a working mother in Dallas blames a laid-off miner in Kentucky, or a truck driver in Ohio blames a schoolteacher in Detroit, the real culprits keep getting away with it." A tremor passed through Rachel's composure. Not because she disagreed, but because she knew Jasmine was right. "And you," Jasmine continued, her gaze fixed and unwavering, "you have a bigger microphone than almost anyone. So the question isn't whether you understand the stakes. The question is what you'll do with that platform when the cameras go dark." Rachel swallowed again, unable to find a ready reply. The final seconds of the segment drained away in silence. In living rooms across America, people stared at their screens, feeling something they hadn't expected when they tuned in, a sharp, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was finally willing to call things what they were. And when Jasmine finally looked away, it wasn't out of deference. It was because she'd said everything she came to say. The director finally whispered into Rachel's earpiece, "We have to close." But there was no urgency in his voice anymore, just the stunned recognition that this had become the kind of broadcast no one could script. Rachel cleared her throat, but the words caught halfway up. For a split second, she looked like every polished veneer she'd built around herself might simply fall away. Jasmine didn't move to fill the gap. She sat still, the calm center of a storm she'd refused to pretend wasn't real. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been all night. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, "thank you for being here." Jasmine inclined her head once, neither gracious nor dismissive. "Just present." "Thank you for having me," she replied evenly. "And for letting this conversation go somewhere honest." Rachel looked down at her desk, her fingers brushing over the papers she'd spent hours preparing. None of them had mattered in the end. "Final thoughts?" she asked quietly. Jasmine turned toward the camera, her gaze steady, her voice so even it almost didn't sound rehearsed, because it wasn't. "Don't let anyone convince you that your struggle is your fault," she said. "Don't let them tell you that justice is something you have to earn by being quiet and polite. You deserve dignity, whether a camera is watching or not." The red live light winked off. In homes across America, people sat back in their chairs, hearts hammering, feeling like they'd just seen something raw and unvarnished in a world that usually only offered spectacle. Rachel exhaled, the tension draining from her posture. "I suppose," she said, her voice tentative, "that's what accountability looks like." Jasmine stood, collecting nothing but her composure. "No," she corrected softly. "That's what the truth sounds like when no one edits it." And with that, she turned and walked off the set. Rachel didn't stop her. For once, she didn't have anything left to say. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to shout or perform, it's to stand your ground and speak the truth that no one else will say out loud. Tonight, Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive an ambush. She flipped the script. She showed what it looks like when a woman refuses to be reduced to a headline, refuses to let someone else define her worth or her community's struggle. Because in the end, this isn't about a viral moment or a clever comeback. It's about the courage to confront the comfortable lies we tell ourselves, and to replace them with something real, something human. If this story made you feel something, share it. Talk about it. Remember that your voice matters, even when powerful people hope you'll stay silent. And never forget, the truth doesn't need permission. It just needs someone brave enough to say it. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged, and above all, stay unafraid.